Hey, how's it going? Today I wanted to talk a little bit about software companies. Take a little bit of a break from the usual business breakdowns and talk more thematically about these type of companies. And the reason I want to do that is because across the investing landscape, if you will, there's kind of two standout categories of business that do remarkably well over time. The first is consumer products, so things like Coca-Cola, cigarettes, Johnson and Johnson type stuff, things with brand power. Things that have dominated the common consciousness for a very long period of time, and they're things that they don't take a lot. They don't cost a lot to produce, and you can charge many magnitudes higher than what they cost to produce onto a customer. And there's a lot of brand loyalty, and there's distribution networks, and many of these companies are extraordinarily large roll-ups in terms of the IP that they purchased over the years. So that's one segment. The next best returning segment, and certainly one of the largest growth areas, at least as long as I have been alive, is software. I work in software, and so I'm somewhat familiar with how parts of the business work. And yeah, there's been just, tremendous number of big winners in the market over very long periods of time. And it's something that is really interesting to study, even though if you're familiar or you study it for a longer period of time, you probably get chased off wanting to invest in some of these companies just because of some of the dynamics that we'll get into. But the fact remains that there are extraordinarily, some very extraordinary businesses and some very interesting businesses, which are really cool to have a look at. And there's not really any reason to think why the high returns that have been generated in the past, why you shouldn't be able to replicate at least some of those moving forward. Perhaps one of the things that would be said that at least on the platforms of the internet that we currently have, mobile, desktop, that perhaps the very large low-hanging fruit has already been captured. But even having said that, the large internet platforms are still growing at paces which are, kind of mind-bending. And in the face of, not a huge financial catastrophe that probably continues for some time. So anyways, I penned down here a few points on some of the ways that I have thought about investing in some of these businesses over time. I think I've probably been much pickier in the types of businesses that I wanted to invest in software because I was familiar as a consumer with some of them. And I was familiar with how weak, poor software companies could be. So it would certainly be a mistake I feel like it probably would have been a mistake to make a basket bet on different types of software at different periods of time. Certainly if you had made a basket bet on something like social media, that would have been a very middling investment over a long period of time. And so this is this is a part of the market where you want to have a lot of conviction that something is going to be a long-term winner, and you want to have a lot of conviction in its competitive positioning over time. So yeah, software is one of the best businesses in the world, but you need an extremely, 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 extremely compelling reason why you're going to invest in any particular name. And I don't think it's something that you can just make a basket bet on and ride it as a theme. Software is not a theme. If you worked in a particular technology or some sector of software that services some industry, you'll know that all of them are dramatically different from one another. And their unit economics are different. And the way that things might progress over time will also be different. So it's imperative to have a very good understanding of what the company does and how its products are distributed, how they're remunerated, and probably a decent understanding of how the industry is structured that it services. In some cases, that'll be quite a narrow thing, and in other cases, there's a broad-ranging consumer software that applies to a large number of people. Like I said, I haven't invested in a tremendously large number of these companies, and some of them you probably wouldn't even call them software, but for the most part, I would call them software. So broadly invested into internet consumer software companies, if you will, Meta Platforms and Alphabet. Alphabet, or Google's main product, and still the lion's share of the revenue comes from the online digital platforms and their advertising offering. That's a very clear example of a broad application of consumer software. Facebook and Meta Platforms is similar. They operate a family of applications, mostly on mobile these days. You can still access the platforms via a desktop, similar to Google in where it generates its revenue from in terms of advertising. As far as what most people would think about software, as far as an application or downloadable program or on-premise application that most people would categorize this in, I was an investor in Slack before it was acquired by Salesforce. Tremendous product, a very broad B2B enterprise SMB application used in communications. So not dissimilar from the kind of services that Facebook offers, but more in a discrete business vertical. Fabulous product, still use it. Wish I could have owned that one for a long time. And the other one is Travel Sky Technologies, which I've talked a little bit about. They're in the GDS platform for ticketing flights in mainland China. So the characteristics of basically all of these businesses is extremely high return on equity, high return on invested capital, pre the cloud wars or the infrastructure as a service wars, very little or no capex. Google is probably violates that one now as they ramp up their data center offering in terms of GCP. But the other three, I mean, Slack, it's an application that you run on your computer and access via the internet. There's not a whole lot of capital expenditures that need to be committed. Travel Sky Technology, somewhat similar. They built out their own data centers, which they completed last year. So the CapEx moving forward is probably significantly less than it has been in the past. And Meta as well, as they gear up to compete in short form video and the applications they're going to need in machine learning and artificial intelligence. They're becoming more CapEx heavy, but traditionally very little capital expenditure. A lot of these software companies are characterized, in terms of kind of network effects. There was Slack was certainly a good example of that. It was more of a network effect within a business. So the typical way that Slack would make its way into a business. And to be clear, if I haven't mentioned it, this is a inter-business messaging application. So instant message within a business for professional purposes, although it's used, it is used in non-professional as well, although there's been other applications that have popped up which have serviced that market a little bit better, like Discord and Twitch. However, Slack is the B2B go-to in that vertical. Had a limited inter-business network effect. So usually, the typical way that it would enter a business is that it originally was popular amongst developers, software developers. And so, software developers are highly paid, in-demand skills, and basically, they move from, can move from company to company, and they usually you'd have a business, it would already have Slack, and perhaps a software engineer leaves, goes to a new company. They love Slack. I mean, once you use it, you're hooked on it. And they might get their small software team to start using it, petition their CTO or whoever it is, procurement, whatever, and they might get it for their little segment of the company. And typically, once it begins somewhere, other people want to use it. They want to get on it as well, and so it kind of builds out in concentric circles from one department. It's not a mass implementation or onboarding. And so as one person uses it, it's really valuable maybe to the first couple of people who uses it, and then that network within a company gets incrementally more valuable as more and more people using it, and the value of being able to instantly message people, share documents, have custom applications run on Slack, integrate your calendar, so on and so forth, becomes a very powerful inter-office network. They had attempted just before the sale to Salesforce to implement what they called Slack Connect, which was you could communicate with external customers on Slack Connect. So you could be using your company's Slack and have your profile within it, and you could link up with your counterparty at a different company to communicate instantaneously with them as well. So that was really interesting, but probably did not have the broadest application in the way that things panned out. That may have been extremely valuable if the coronavirus pandemic had not happened, and Microsoft hadn't made significant strides in their Teams product in 2019 onward, and then during the pandemic. But Meta Platforms, that's the original network effect business. Alphabet is a conglomerate of network effect businesses. Travel Sky Technologies with its ticketing platform, a small network effect, because you need to have all all airports who are selling tickets for different air carriers to all run on the same ticketing platform. You can't have individual ticketing platforms at 217 different airports. It wouldn't be efficient. People want to get trained on one particular system. You want to have just one kind of integration feeding out ticketing prices. Having multiple systems wouldn't actually be very cost efficient. Many of these are characterized by extremely high switching costs. So you might think about Microsoft or Bloomberg terminals. Once you've learned how to operate one operating system, once a sufficiently large number of people have learned how to use one operating system, and that operating system is sufficiently difficult enough to require some kind of training, and then as that product becomes a standard, the likelihood that a challenger is going to get you to get off a particular operating system and learn a completely new one is extremely difficult. And so this is why Bloomberg will offer their terminal free of, often at a free of charge or a discounted rate. Universities, I think Autodesk does this as well, where you want to have people trained using this very early in their career. Once they're trained on it, they're not going anywhere else. And so gifting a few 100 terminals to some universities becomes kind of like an infinite return on investment proposition. So high switching costs. You don't want to switch off the system once you've learned how to use it. That would be an inefficient use of time. Many of these are characterized by winner-take-all markets. At least the good software businesses are characterized by this. So be a confluence or a lollapalooza of factors, some of which I've talked about, which reinforce that one provider is better than many in terms of time it saves, money it saves, and so forth. The great thing about software is that it scales almost limitlessly. Once you've created the additional product to create another license or another copy of the software, it's the click of one button. I've done it myself. Didn't maybe it cost me 3 calories to create. You know, that's what it took. And along with the actual scale of the product, software enables a small team to support very large numbers of customers. So I think about the business that I work for. There's perhaps 20 software engineers, a similar number of support and sales staff. So maybe 40, 50, 60 people supporting several thousand people who would use the system. And so that is a really good thing. It means that the value that the software engineers can bring to adding initial value and then incremental value over time can be extremely high. And a support person trained enough is able to also offer tremendous amount of value to a large number of customers. So where we are today is quite interesting. Software has obviously existed for as long as there has been personal computing, and before that, it's the programs that run on the hardware in computing, and most people would probably be pretty familiar with that. The initial software products, or at least the initial B2B software products, were on-premises licenses. So a good example would be a cost of goods, like a bill of goods accounting program for a manufacturing business. So they need to record imports, outputs, costs for the things from the raw goods that they're taking in, and then what they're outputting as a manufactured product. And so I've come into contact with some of these. Are absolutely terrible. It hurts my soul to remember using them. But they're pretty rudimentary, old school products, and the way that they were delivered in the past is that a salesperson would call you up, and there'd be tremendous benefits from going from doing all these calculations and accounting, etc., on a piece of paper or in books, ledgers, what have you. And you say, great, let's sign up. What would have happened is there would have been a license agreement for a certain number of years to use this software. So big kind of upfront costs for implementation. That would be over a number of years, and you might have some kind of support contract for when things went wrong, or you needed to call out a technician to do it, or perhaps you needed extra training on how to use the system. And so after you had signed off on all of that, all these upfront costs, you'd the software company, they'd send a team down to your office, install it on your network, install it on all the individual computers. And you wouldn't necessarily need the internet to access the software. It would run internally on your network. And so that's fine. That's kind of like a traditional service contract. The accounting for that is very similar because they're paying everything up front. They might get to depreciate the license over a number of years. That was the traditional on-premises model. Now, there's a lot of that was a good first step, but there's a lot of parts to that which are not great. So the software provider is not necessarily incentivized to do a whole lot of support or a product development after a certain standalone piece of software was built. And so obviously there's in many of these, there were versions of the software produced afterwards, but kind of the software company may have been incentivized to upgrade you to the new product at the end of your license, or the customer would stay on the existing license for some period of time because the cost to transition to a new product was so high. And so they might, suffer using a terrible piece of software for a very long period of time. And then over time, they wouldn't, the software provider would not support older models. And so I certainly worked for a company that used to calculate the cost of goods and the bill of goods in a manufacturing context, and the piece of software they were using was 20 years old. No one supported it. To make any changes to the product, it had to get individual consultants who would charge like outrageous fees. This software consultant that used to do work on the internal system, he drove a Lamborghini. Anyways, so it's not really cost effective. There's not really any, feedback loops. If you had feedback about, a particular piece of software, why would you care? We're going to build that in the next one. We can't update the existing one, so on. Anyways, at the beginning of the 2010s, and essentially was a story for that 10-year period, 2010 till now. A lot of these on-prem license software deals transitioned to the cloud and to a software as a service model. So this has been a really, really good thing. Software as a service businesses have much better unit economics. The interests are aligned a lot better. So instead of large license fees up front, you might pay monthly costs on a per seat basis, or whatever discrete vertical gets serviced, depending on the industry. In the case of Slack, it's a good example. Essentially, they charge by the seat, so the number of people using that, and they have a freemium model, and then they have more advanced models with more on a higher cost per seat basis, depending on particular level of service that you may need. And that's quite good. A business can project out their costs on a on a very granular level. In really hard times, they may be able to scale back the service offering or go back to the free version of the offering, and then scale back up their usage needs as the economic environment changes. So the customer has a lot of flexibility. They've got visibility into what their costs will be, and on the business's side, they're incentivized to keep the customer using the business in a very long way. And so as that increment is 1 month, and because the software is now hosted on the cloud, accessible via a browser or perhaps an application on a computer, in terms of Slack, that's an application that you can download to your desktop or to your phone. They're very incentivized to continue to develop the product constantly. And those product developments can be made, on an instantaneous update. So if you follow Slack on Twitter, they're constantly posting about new things that they brought out, and quite often it's about like inconsequential things like, I've got version 8.9 of extended emoji library, but sometimes those things are really, they can be important. And so, they continue to invest over time. And then over time, if you build something extremely valuable, you might even be able to raise your prices, which is yeah, really good thing. So that's been the sort of broad history of how software products are delivered. Obviously today, this software generally is delivered either as a application on a desktop or mobile device. You download, and then that piece of software may get updated via the internet, depending on the communication needs of the software. Or it's distributed through a browser on the general internet. So that would be Google, Meta platforms, or something like Salesforce. They were the original cloud-based, browser-based enterprise software application, and a tremendous success story over the years. The transition from on-prem to software as a service and the cloud had implications for how the accounting changed within some of these businesses. So as many businesses, or at least the good software businesses, transitioned to a SaaS model during the 2010s, quite large upheavals in how it appeared that the business was performing. So this was like Jumbo Interactive, I believe Autodesk in the 2015, 16, 17 period, transition to a SaaS service. FICO in their software offering is still transitioning from the old license holders to the software as a service offering. And so you can see how the accounting would change. Instead of people paying a very large upfront fee for installation and for some period of years, that changed to a much smaller monthly recurring, and that might be guaranteed a number of years. Like you might sign an initial commitment for some period of years. Certainly what we do in my business. And then you've got those kind of guaranteed payments per month, which may vary depending on the variables of the pricing. So in the case of Slack, that would be per seat basis. On the software company that I work for, it's a booking reservation system, so some percentage of the monthly cost will be the number of bookings that a center puts through. And so there could be variability there, but for the most part, traditional, like the one-off just cost per month to use, you can kind of project that out with some visibility, but it's in much smaller increments, and the costs for transitioning somebody to that are still paid up front. So in the old days, you may have had a software salesman make a big deal, 4-year deal for a license on-prem, and maybe it was $50,000. And so obviously once the sales rep made the sale, the cost for that would be recognized immediately, but so would the dollar value. And so now you may have software reps being paid upfront, or other costs for acquiring the customer, such as advertising, etc. Those costs are realized immediately on the point of sale, even though you're collecting the revenues for a very long period of time. And so you may have a longer payback period, but you may also have a much longer lifetime value to that customer. So the implications for the accounting, which get talked about quite a lot now, but was probably not so clear in the early days of the transition to SaaS. So I've talked a little bit about how the products were delivered in the old days, and a little bit how they've been doing it now. But for anyone who's not particularly familiar with how this works, and in this case, I won't necessarily talk about consumer software products distributed over the internet. And by distributed, I mean the effective sale is distributed over the internet, because that's a different dynamic than, say, your traditional B2B SaaS. And most people would be familiar with like the business model of a Google or a Facebook. Many people watching this would probably use their products as a business before. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. These places aggregate enormous attention. You want to run an ad, it's self-service, you pay, away you go. I'm going to talk about more of the high touch B2B software products. So like I've already mentioned, it's vital to understand how a software company works and its unit economics at the most basic level, on the customer level. Vital, because these things can just be so different. Again, it's not a homogenous subpopulation. It varies a lot. And even in the company that I work for, we have a number of different software products that all get priced differently, largely based on the competitive landscape for each and the product that they offer. Even within broadly the same vertical, there can be large differences in how products are priced. So, the whole life cycle of a company begins with, probably a couple of software engineers getting together and developing a product. Bang. Like if you read the history of any of the, interesting software businesses that have been founded, in the last 10, 15 years, it's always something. It's always an interesting story. Like Slack's a good one. Stuart Butterfield and co were running a large multiplayer MMORPG online game, and they developed an internal communication tool that was pretty excellent. The MMORPG failed. It failed to get enough. Failed to be commercially viable. And so that was shut down. However, they had this really great communication tool, and they already had some of their friends using it, and there was a path there for that to be a large B2B business. And quite often that's the case with some of these. Like it's an odd story, there's no rhyme or reason or particular way that these get founded which make them successful. So they all need to be studied individually. And so there's a product development phase, and a product's born. After a company gets a few customers and starts developing its sales force and distribution model, this generally falls into a typical sales type business. So there have been many software companies over the years, like the Atlassian guys or Slack or whatever, who for whatever reason have made a big deal in their marketing about not having salespeople. And that's fine if you can have an organic form of distribution, so where your cost of customer acquisition approaches zero. That's obviously preferable and fantastic and great. You can have an unlimited customer acquisition cost to lifetime value of customer calculation, and just compound forever. So that's kind of like a Facebook, a Google. Their cost to acquire customers is virtually, it's not a lot. It's not a lot because their offerings are so powerful. And so Slack had a bit of that to begin with. The product was orders of magnitude better. I mean, even as late as 2018, if you had used Skype for Business, you'd want to kill yourself using it. Slack was much, much better, many orders of magnitude better. And because it would, software developers would kind of germinate the product from company to company they went to, and as it spread in certain verticals like education or design, it would cross-pollinate naturally. You'd want to take this with you when you went somewhere new. And maybe a software engineer wouldn't work somewhere that didn't use Slack, and kind of those dynamics would play out. And if you had like a freemium model, if you're going to download a free piece of software, you don't need a salesperson to talk to about that. You can just try it out. And then as soon as you're trying it out, someone else is trying it out, you get someone else, and so on. Those network effects we talked about. But that is not every product is like that. Many products, especially in B2B enterprise sales, need to be distributed via salespeople because the service offering is probably extremely complex. There may be custom development that needs to be made. There need to be very specific problems that get solved. There need to be complex questions around pricing. And you may have a great number of stakeholders to incorporate to get a sale done. So many companies run on a traditional sales platform, and people kind of run it differently, but you have kind of different gradations of salesperson. You may have business development representatives or BDMs, and then you have account executives, and then you might have account executives within different verticals. So you may have SMB, you may have enterprise, what have you, depending on which particular vertical you're servicing. And in those cases, salespeople, they're doing what salespeople do. They're going to conferences, they're making calls, they're sending emails, they're returning inbound correspondence, and they are closing deals. So that's the two different ways that these are usually distributed. Now, once a salesperson has gone through the arduous work of signing up a new client, typically that client is then handed over. And this is a little bit different for everyone. This is broadly how it works. You'll have an onboarding training team, broadly customer success. And so their job will be to implement the solution within the new organization. So that's training, can be on site, can be online. Sometimes it can be very high touch, sometimes it can be low touch. Maybe software developers need to get involved at this point if there's certain custom dev required. But the point here is to launch the new business using your software solution successfully and have it embedded within their workflows. And that gets you to the launch. And so launch of some of these systems can be, very different depending on the product. So you may have Slack, which would be, launches when the first person starts using it, and then more people start using it. And then you may have, HR, ERP software that, a large number of people all need to be trained on before the company starts using it. And there needs to be, extensive planning around the launch of that product, because many different factors all need to be coordinated at the same time for it to be successful. Once a customer is successfully launched, which hopefully is a large number of your customers, if you have many customers leaving during onboarding and potentially suing the company for a misleading product, that's a huge red flag and likely the death of a small software company. You move into customer success and account management. So a company will employ people, and this kind of bleeds into support a little bit, to manage an existing customer base. Having had plenty of personal experience with this, if you have customers, large customers, important customers, if you don't have contact with them in the kind of B2B side, and you have a specialized software solution, if you don't touch base with these people often, you simply will be blindsided by problems. So quite often, if you're not making an effort to touch base with these clients, they're not going to come to you and say, we want to talk about X, Y, and Z problem. Somebody's initial reaction will be, if this is a problem, I need to find a new solution to fix the problem. And if they associate you with the problem, they're not coming to you to say that. So you kind of have to force some of these issues, and you work through them. And there may be parts of the software that they're not implementing properly. There may be upsells that happen at that point. There may be license renewals which happen at that point. And so customer success and managing the accounts going forward is not a very sexy part of the business, but important in terms of retention. There's general support. So, all software companies will have like an email address or a phone number or chat that customers can send issues to. Yeah, it's pretty horrific being in support. Yeah, not a lot of fun, but a very good way to learn your way in the nuts and bolts of a particular business. Not very sexy part. Usually most people who start in support, either in IT support or general support, are hoping to make their way into sales or into a engineering type role. Over time, one of the fantastic things about software is that because depending on what kind of infrastructure architectures, how the software has been built, you'll be able to layer on new products and services over time. And so the best case scenario will be that you're able to identify sales, customer success, management are able to identify large problems that could be addressed using your software that would be many of your existing customers would benefit from using. And so if that can be done successfully and a successful solution can be manufactured internally, there'll be opportunities there for you to upsell, for you to renew people on terms which are greater than what you've got them on at the moment. That's like an infinite, that's a very high ROI. You're selling to a captive client base. And depending on how valuable the solution is, you may be able to charge quite a lot of money for that. And so many smaller software businesses that aren't serving extremely large bodies of clients will often get a specific feature requests from their large clients. And so a lot of the R&D in some of these businesses are funded directly by the clients, which is kind of great. You can outsource your R&D spend. So it's something to keep an eye on, because maybe you have a very large customer and that customer is very different from all, maybe your medium and other large customers, and they're going to pay you a lot of money to produce something very narrow. It may not, actually be that valuable to the rest of the client base. There may be an acrimonious relationship there where if they paid for you to do the software development and now you're on selling that software to your other clients, there could be animosity there, but typically quite a good thing. Like I mentioned, client retention, that's obviously quite a large part. So, typically even in SaaS deals, you may have clients sign up for some period of time. So 2, 3, 4, 5 years, a commitment like that. And so usually at the tail end of that, there are always conversations about retention. What are you going to do for me going forward? Can I get a better deal on these terms? All that kind of thing. And retain the customers is extremely valuable. If you can re-sign up large customers for long periods of time, again, it's just adding to the economics of that initial sale. Right, and so in time, all customers churn. Not all software companies are going to last forever, but that's the typical life cycle of any particular customer. And yeah, it's important to understand all the variables that happen at the customer level, because not all customers are the same. They're not all different needs. They're all not the same volume. They're not the same number of seats. There may be risks in concentration. So software providers that primarily serve the government, that's a whole different kettle of fish than people who primarily serve certain business sectors. I'd say there's probably something that you want to look out for in a lot of these is pricing power. So if you are coming across a software business that you've never seen before, you really want to understand the pricing dynamics, how they may be raised over time. If they've been raised in the past, how successful were they in raising prices? Not dissimilar from other fantastic businesses. And it's important to note that software is in every sense, quite often these are dominated by long tails. So successful software products, there may be one of them in a particular market and 99 failures. In terms of customer concentration, quite often, the square root of the number of clients the software business will have, the square root of that number will be the number of clients who are producing all of the revenue for that company. And any particular product that a software company layers on will have one product, one feature that they add on will have 30x times the value that all the other software products that they do. So it's extremes in every sense, and I've seen it you know, a lot of different businesses, clients. It really it's a feature in every term. So the things that, I would be looking for in terms of these things which have served me well, is, like we were mentioning before, the unit economics. And the unit economics should be extremely attractive, even given that, modern accounting will not necessarily, that might not give you the best initial understanding. There's a meme of, investing through the income statement. And for certain software products, that is going to be true, because like I mentioned, they will not have a tremendous amount of capital expenditures. They are investing in intangibles in terms of research and development, creating software, which is in itself an intangible, and they are investing in engineers and salespeople, which are the two vectors which will really move the dials, and all those costs are incurred upfront, as opposed to the SaaS model where the value is accrued over a longer period of time. Like I mentioned, natural modes of distribution, so modes of distributing the software that don't necessarily require expensive salespeople are preferable, but it's not a killer. There's been many successful software businesses built off of a traditional sales force. It's just a slightly different, customer acquisition cost to lifetime value of the customer calculation. There's no reason why salespeople can't be economic. You do want to you want to understand that dynamic, though. There's no reason why it can't be, but quite often, software company may overinvest in salespeople, the wrong type of salespeople, and so on. So that's something that needs to be understood. You want to be on the lookout for significant lock-ins. So once somebody starts using this product, you want to have a very good explanation as for why they're going to keep using it and they won't use something else. The last 10 or 15 years has been characterized by almost ungodly amounts of capital being poured into software. So the likelihood that you're going to have a competitor, even if you have a moderately successful piece of software, is a virtual guarantee. There needs to be a good reason why this person is going to stay with you, why they're not going to go to a competitor, and why it can be valuable to them over a very long period of time. So we mentioned that with a Bloomberg terminal. If you're working in finance, you'll go to university before working in the industry. There will be a Bloomberg terminal at your university. You'll use it. You'll get familiar with it. And then once you go into whichever part of finance, you'll want to use that Bloomberg terminal. And then, the reps from Bloomberg will want to train you on a very specific part of the Bloomberg terminal that'll be valuable for for the part of your career. And so tremendous lock in there. You're not going to spend 25 years using a Bloomberg terminal from the time that you're 18, 19, and then one day when you're 46, make a decision to use something completely new. Just not going to happen. And so likewise for, Slack, once you've started using that, you've got a lot of history on there. You've got a lot of custom integrations. Maybe your whole calendar is being run off there. The institutional memory that would be lost by transitioning to something else would be a disaster. You'd have to, use a new messaging system, which would be, a little bit painful. And so all those things kind of build into a large lock-in. You could say the same thing with Microsoft. No one's using a different operating system now. Not going to happen. Certainly not on desktop. In some kind of sense, you want to have a good reason as to why the innovation has stopped. So this ties into the lock-in. Or you want a very good explanation as to why this firm you're investing in is going to continue to win in the face of competitors. I would be very skeptical about people who had an explanation for the latter there. Not saying it can't be true, but software is something, where $100,000 and a couple of smart guys in a garage could create a fantastic product. And it happens every day. Happens absolutely every day. So you need a very good explanation as to why yours is going to be the last in a particular category, why you're going to win, why you're going to capture most of the market share, why your competitors are going to lose, and why once you've built X, Y, and Z, why you won't need to continue to, why you'll need to, knock it out every 4 years, knock it out of the park every 4 years to continue winning, because you'll lose at that game eventually. And so actually part of that, which is a good point, to invert this would be the opposite. So this would be software companies that are on a sales and research and development hamster wheel. A commodity, poorly differentiated software product that is well capitalized will find themselves just spending inordinate amounts of money on sales and R&D. So to continue growing, you need to keep running digital advertising or whatever kind of advertising and marketing you're doing. Continue to hire more and more salespeople for a product that where the return on invested capital calculation no longer works, to keep growing. And so on top of that, to remain relevant in any given marketplace, you'll have to invest tremendous amounts of money in engineers, developing, new products, new innovative features, so on and so forth. And these things just spiral downwards. So you need to have a very good, like you need to say like, wow, if we just like killed all the salespeople and, we just kept enough engineers to keep the lights on, how successful would we be here? And if the answer is, we go to zero immediately, that would be not a good answer. Even though, probably all software companies wouldn't do very well if you canceled everyone. Along with the comments I made about pricing power, there needs to be a very large contrast in the value to cost. So I've noticed that, if there's a very large delta between the fees that somebody's paying for a piece of software and the value they're accruing out of it, that person's not going to leave. That account's not going to churn. There's a very large delta between the two there, orders of magnitude. So, it costs them $1,000 a month to run the product, but it's facilitating, $50,000 a month worth of revenue directly for that business. They're not going anywhere. They may not. And the delta for a competitor, what they're going to offer will need to be, some order of magnitude for a customer to leave under those, under that scenario. A lot of these businesses are, at least in the public markets, are categorized by like borderline outrageous SBC, stock-based comp, and it's just it's just inevitable that companies will have to pay this. Even the very large dominant companies still have to pay SBC. So yeah, and the reason for that is that even now, software engineers, there's not a tremendous amount of them for the market opportunity that is for them. It's a highly specialized skill set, and the impact that a great engineer can have within a business, like use the meme of the 10x engineer, a fabulous software engineer can offer orders of magnitude greater impact to a company than a mediocre software engineer. And so under those dynamics, where a single person can, perhaps be responsible for a product that generates tens, hundreds, billions of dollars worth of value, that person is going to be able to have their pick of where they want to work, who they want to work for, under what terms they want to work. And, once the culture of employees participating in the value accretion of a business, the value accreting to equity, that is, that's something that's going to stick around. So paying the SBC is probably, really good thing to lock in some of these people. They probably deserve it. It aligns the interests, and they're valuable enough for that to be paid. So the real question there is, you need to have a good explanation as to why the value will accrue to outside equity holders instead of the internal employees. And the worst example of that would be Twitter. Essentially, all the marginal value has been captured by the employees of that company. Like crazy stock-based comp. And so with companies like Google and Facebook, you've seen recently that share buy, they become profitable enough and are generating sufficient cash flows above their ability to reinvest it responsibly, where the stock-based comp is starting to be outweighed by the share repurchases. So that's an example. Or Autodesk, they're able to purchase perhaps 1 or 2 turns more than the stock-based comp that they're issuing, and that's a calculation that can work out for shareholders. The other interesting side analogy to talk about would be Constellation Software. So this is a subset of private equity, initially a private equity investor in software businesses. And there have been other examples like this, like Thoma Bravo. There's another one that escapes me at the moment, that have run software businesses, acquired software businesses, and then run them in a traditionally cost-effective manner, as opposed to the stock-based, crazy stock-based comp and employee benefits and all that kind of jazz that the large public tech players have become infamous for. And so Constellation Software was a software roll-up based in Canada, has a legendary semi-mythical founder, Mark Leonard. And so his original innovation was that he would buy what he called vertical market software, which is software that services a small a market opportunity that would only support one software provider. And so the typical example is the software company that runs country clubs. And so he would, and so because the market was winner take all and it was small, quite often these software businesses would be quite profitable. And because they were so niche and off the wall, they were, perhaps run by not the most sophisticated people who weren't bringing, MBA level management and cost efficiency experience to it. So he, and even now there's tens of thousands of these businesses across the continental United States and continental North America and Europe. And so you could buy all these small little companies, and they would be, kind of profitable from day one, and you can roll them all up, and so you can de-risk your profile by having a small number of extremely profitable software businesses, and it would do okay even if a number of these businesses eventually wound down, which they have been over time. And so you can take all the free cash flow and you can roll those into new deals in a kind of a compounding fashion. And the lesson from there, as opposed to the golden children of enterprise SaaS, as we've talked a little bit before, their model was to buy these small companies. And from what I've heard from people who are familiar, typically, they'd go in, maybe it's a company doing 2 to 5 million in EBITDA. They've got like 30 employees. They go in, they take over the business, retire the founders, whoever's running the business, and probably cut take 30 people down to 4. The people who stay just kind of keep the business running on itself. You maybe have a finance person, 1 or 2 software engineers, and then someone to do the sales. And the people who stay are compensated extremely well, and they run that business for cash flow. And so there's plenty of interesting lessons in there. But that's been an extremely successful strategy for itself, its spin-outs, and a number of other people focused on that segment of the market. Probably a little bit different now as many of these SaaS business, as the transition to SaaS has taken place, because the market rightly appreciates some of these businesses at much higher multiples than made that business have a lot of sense in the past. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think they're acquiring a number of these small software businesses for between 5 and 10 times EBITDA, or maybe lower, like 3 to 5 times EBITDA, which, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense in terms of just doing that all day long, if you can do it. In terms of the large public software businesses getting away from a roll-up like Constellation, the best software businesses are traditionally very profitable from day one, or very close to day one. So, you know, Google was profitable when it IPO'd, Facebook profitable before it IPO'd, Microsoft has been profitable for many decades, Autodesk profitable for many decades, Amadeus booking software, extremely profitable from day one. And so those are good things. I mean, if you're going to invest in a business that is, you know, cash flow negative, not very interesting margin profile, and spending a tremendous amount of money on research and development and sales, you want to have an extremely good reason why you're doing that. Extremely good reason. In the case of Slack, it was negative earnings for many years, but I was familiar with the product. I was familiar with its distribution model. I was familiar with the people who ran it, and familiar with the market opportunity that it was going after. So I felt that it was compelling at the time. I probably would not invest in something like that now, even though many of these multiples have come down. It's not exactly the kind of thing. Like, maybe that would have been a better investment for me sometime down the road had it, and I believe that it eventually would have been very profitable. But then, you know, obviously Microsoft Teams has really made a tremendous dent in its market opportunity. So those dynamics change from the time that I invested in it. Great software it's no different from building a toll bridge. It's the kind of question I like to ask myself before investing in anything. Is this a toll bridge, or is this a forever war fighting on all fronts to remain relevant? And some of those things like Travel Sky or Amadeus or Bloomberg, they're toll bridges. And these aren't necessarily pieces of software that you would say are incredibly innovative, even though they are. They do offer tremendous value. And so all that kind of builds into a Lollapalooza effect. You want to have many different reinforcing reasons as to why you're going to invest in one of these. And you're going to want to keep in mind the general profile of the business and the unit economics. But it's always fascinating. It's always a different story. There's always you know, a different reason why someone has been successful in some particular product. And so, yeah, you want to be cognizant of all that kind of stuff. So anyways, that's my few thoughts on that. Let me know what you think.